Hi, this is Live at Kigali, hosted by the Kigali Global Dialogue. And I am your host for the session on women-led development and the 2030 Agenda. And I'm joined today by my expert speakers. And I'm very happy you are here with me today. I'm joined by Veronica Portugal from Mexico, by Judith Mwaniki from Kenya, and Mainak Ghosh from India, but working in the US. The G20 has committed to the goal of reducing the female labor participation gap by 25% by 2025. We will be discussing this topic. The Indian G20 has put women-led development also at the core of its agenda. So my first question to you, esteemed panel, would be, what are actually the practical steps that governments can do to ensure that development policies are gendered? Can I start with you, Judith?
Thank you. For us to attain all SDGs, women must be at the center. They must be at the forefront as well. And also in this aspect, when we're thinking about governments have to bring women aboard and make sure that they sit on the decision-making tables. They take forefront, they take a lead in policy development, and they also voice, or rather have a voice on the table. So governments must put in place, and not just put in place, but very deliberately articulate the agenda of having women at the decision-making table and in the spaces that matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Mainak, anything from your side to add to what Judith just shared?
Absolutely. I absolutely echo everything that Judith said. Coming from an investment perspective, I do think that capital allocation is also very important. And there is a concept of gender budgeting, where every scheme that a government launches should have a component where they analyze the impacts on gender and also specify a particular percentage of the budget for that scheme, specifically to be allocated towards gender alignment. And I think that would really go a long way towards making sure that the capital allocation actually matches the authoritative allocation of values of gender alignment. Yeah.
Are we already seeing this with most of the G20 states? Veronica, can I ask this question to you?
Okay, thank you, Kristina. I feel very honored to be in this panel with these top-notch experts with me. Okay, talking about the G20, I must say that barely 11 years ago, in the G20 Summit Declaration of Los Cabos in my home country, in Mexico, the G20's leaders committed to full women's economic participation and also in the social and political level. So, and this was outside. It was the first time that it was outside of the framework on the context of family and care. So along these 11 years, the progress has been very slow, but has been jeopardized by the COVID pandemic. And we need urgent actions to overcome this gender gap. And I think that one practical way that the countries of the G20 can do to reduce this gap produced by the COVID-19 is to analyze gender policies in the framework of systems thinking and complexity in a holistic approach as a whole, because there are an interaction of one policy with another. For example, even when there are policies that are gender blind, that doesn't mean they are not gender neutral. For example, talking about the budget, one of the mandates of the G20 is to have fiscal discipline. And this can lead to cuts in the budget in programs dedicated to women and girls. So it's fine to have fiscal discipline, but we must also be coherent with the policies about gender, because we cannot produce one policy that prevents the achievement of gender equality. So this is something that the G20 must be active advocating for gender equality. Even when the G20 has this original sin of lack of accountability, of lack of compliance, because it's an informal platform. And this is an opportunity for India to advocate for accountability and compliance towards gender equality in this year.
So Veronica, you just mentioned a couple of aspects that anyone implementing gender policies need to be aware of. I want to go a bit deeper here. Can you all please share with me what else can be done to ensure that these policies are actually secure and sustainable?
Well, as I mentioned before, we need to analyze in this framework of the leverage of one policy, and also to analyze the structures that can prevent the participation of women and also in the public and the private space, and also to analyze all the power imbalances involving in these structures and in this framework, because this can prevent us to impose policies top-down that can be bureaucratic and that fall short of that they can have potential, but at the end they fall short to achieve the expectations. So we have to, in gender, that it's the power imbalances and structures, and we have to be aware of this context of the holistic approach to be ensured that we are not producing like this linear designing and the development. That sometimes is a mistake that we made, like as development practitioners, that we want quick results and we implement this linear design in gender, but we do not take into account the other factors like the power imbalances, like the money, like the budget, and the structures.
Thank you so much, Veronica. That is exactly what it's about, right? When we're talking about gendered policies, feminist policies, it's about power. We need to shift power. So that's fantastic. You just elaborated on that. I'm curious, Judith, from your perspective, how can we shift power within women-led development and ensure that the policies are actually secure and have an impact?
For us to have a power shift, women must be involved at all levels, be it at the grassroots, mid-level to the top levels. And it needs to be a very conscious decision because women have it in them. We have the innate ability to just lead the sustainable development agenda. But for us to do this, it needs to be across the chain. It needs to be from the grassroots, from the smallest level to the highest level. And for this to happen, actually, it needs to be very conscious. Kenya has really tried in that space of ensuring that women are represented. Well, for instance, we have quotas or what we call affirmative action, where for government institutions, a third of the seats are actually reserved for women. So for every, be it hiring or appointive or elective positions, there's a quota that's for women. Which actually ultimately is supposed to add up to make sure that in any institution a third of the representation is women. But then we don't put this. We don't move this beyond parliament, beyond the Senate, beyond parastatals, beyond government appointments. There's need to actually ensure that women are seen, are heard. Their voices are heard even at the lowest level, in the villages, in the farming system. Sorry, I'm a farmer, or rather I work with farmers. And you realize women's voices are very important voices because they're the people who take care of the children. They're the people who bring together children. When we talk about peacekeeping, when we talk about conflict resolution, women are supposed to be center stage. They're supposed to come in, they're supposed to be there and give ideas and ideals because, again, ultimately, women understand a lot more than we want to give them credit for.
You're already touching upon leadership, and I want to talk about leadership in a second a little bit more. Before that, Mainak, can you add your thoughts on how we can ensure the sustainability and the security of gendered policies?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Judith. I think those were some very great points, specifically about the grassroots involvement of women. And I do think that idea of stakeholders having the power kind of inverting the current power dynamic where the top-down policies are imposed on people. If we were to invert that, where the stakeholders, including women, as well as everyone who is who's impacted by policies, are actually able to provide feedback, and not just feedback, but actually empowered oversight. So they're able to make changes in the policy, make course corrections as needed. I think that would be very, very helpful in making sure that policies are sustainable in the longer term. Also, I think, coming from my position as a man who is interested in gender-related topics and gender empowerment, I think we also have a responsibility to move beyond tokenism. Rather, as Judith mentioned, when legislators are elected to parliament in various countries, we have a responsibility to make sure that their voices are actually heard and that we go beyond tokenism to active participation for policy development. Thank you.
And tokenism would definitely be avoided if we had a proper fair share of women in leadership. So let's talk for the last couple of minutes that we have in this format about leadership. Judith, we already heard first thoughts on this from your end, and I want to come back to you in a second as well. Veronica, maybe from a Mexican perspective, what is the best way to support women's leadership in those areas? How can it be accelerated and supported?
Okay. We can take advantage of the gender roles that has been socialized. For example, the knowing of the local level, just as you mentioned, as farmers, that the women has this know-how in the local level. And also, for example, the carefulness, the solutions-driven perspective. And also, it's important to mention that the participation of women in politics, in parliaments, and also in the businesses as a part of the boards of those businesses can produce spillover effects in areas as sustainability and climate change. For example, there are many academic studies that the presence of women in politics and in parliaments can lead to transparency, to more accountability. Also, there is another study that says that all the companies that were committed to the Paris Agreement that were more gender diversified were producing more results in the reduction of carbon emissions. And also the presence of women in boards in businesses can lead to better use of energy resources and the water use. So I think that there are policies that if we make small changes can produce spillover effects and bigger effects in others, for example. So to increase the participation, to be more women in the table, in the discussions, even a small percent of that increase can lead to spillover effects in sustainability, in development, and the climate change goals.
Fantastic. Thank you also for sharing the empirical evidence on that subject matter. For the last 2 minutes, Judith and Mainak, what is there to add from your expertise on accelerating women's leadership in those emerging areas?
Women have an innate intuition, and we have roles assigned to us or roles dictated upon us by the society. For instance, we are mothers. That's a role that's ours. And then they are being a homemaker is assigned to us by society. But even then we have a bigger role because ultimately we are teachers. It's women who teach their children. It's women who nurture the child at the formative stages. So this means we have this sort of connection that's innate in us. And that connection, when we decide to unleash it, is big and transformative and can actually transform the world, and would actually be very instrumental in moving towards achievement of the SDGs. So the thing I'd like to say is for women, we need to get out of our comfort zones. We need to step out there. We need to let our power be seen, and we need to use our power for good.
Mainak, anything to add to those powerful words? The final word would be yours.
Certainly, and those certainly were very powerful words. What I think I can add is in order to enable that female entrepreneurship, there also needs to be a flow of capital to female-led startups. Unfortunately, historically, women-led startups have only raised around 2% of venture capital as well as other types of capital. So I think in order to change that, the investing industry needs to bring in more female decision makers, not just at the analyst level, but also at higher levels like partners. I know that funds in the US are starting to diversify from the top as well. And I think there are some encouraging signals. So for example, 73% of women-led firms were actually founded in the last 5 years. So that does give me great hope that this flow of capital, this flow of attention on gender mainstreaming will continue and will actually have the spillover effects that you just mentioned.
Mainak, Veronica, and Judith, thank you so much for joining me, for sharing your expertise. This was live at Kigali. Thank you for joining in.